So I understand we started the New Zmani Yeshiva, and b'derech kal, if I come b'tchilas hazman, I say some special divrei chizuk, and you just came back from a vacation, and this is amazing vacation to learn a sugya in Dina Momenes, b'yoymoi titen sechoroi. So the Yeshiva asked me to give a shir on b'yoymoi titen sechoroi. 2 psukim. One in Mishnah Torah and one in Torah's Kohanim. Source number 1 and 2. Lo yisashik pu'ula socher, lo yisashik socher oneve evya mechicho. Iyoy titen schoroi, v'lo yisove olav hashemesh ki onihu, ve'ela v'noises nafshoi, v'lo yikro elech ol Hashem v'hoye b'chuchet. So, this is one source in which we learn b'yoy titen schoroi. If you have a worker, you need to pay him on the daily basis. Source number 2, lo yisashik esrecha v'lo yisegzer, lo yisonem pula socher itchu ad boiker. Many mitzvahs that we find in the first 4 Chamoshim, we have Chazorah and Mishnah Torah. Are these 2 psukim the same? Well, it is obvious when you just learn the psukim. One deals with a schir yom, that you need to pay him by day and not wait for night. And the other is a schir laila. Some people work at night. You need to pay him before alois shachar, loisolen pe'ula socher itchu ad boiker. So these 2 psukim deal with 2 different situations. However, in Bava Metzia Kuf Yud Aleph, source number 3, kol hakovish socher oive bechamishu shemes alalu va'asei mishum lo bal tashoik bal tigzol lo yisashik pila socher bal tolin, and the mitzvah to say b'yom titen schoroi. The Rambam seems to bring this Gemara in a different version. Mitzvah to say litin schara socher bizmanu sheneba b'yom titen schoroi ve'im echaroi la'achaz manu yove b'lo yisesa lo yisavei olav hashemesh echad schar adam ve'echad schar behema ve'echad schar aviyim kol hakovish socher gilanot les nafshoi ve'oiver ba'arba azarois. The Maggid Mishnah explains, there is no situation in which, for one time, being male in Pirasocha, you're over in all 5. What the Gemara means to say is that there are 5 different possibilities, 5 different situations in which you are over in one of these lavin. But Schir Yom doesn't have the lav of Schir Lailo, Schir Lailo doesn't have the lav of Schir Yom. If a person intends to pay, he's just late. That is not loy sigzoil, it is not loy zashoik. But in Pu'ula Sochir, the Torah is so machmir that there are 5 different lavin in different situations. I want to focus on source number 6 because I have some thoughts about this. Tshuvas v'hanogas, Agon Agodel, Rav Moshe Sternbuch, should live ad bias HaMoshiach. Chacham echod meivi minag HaKodesh HaChofetz Chaim, shedikdik l'shalem lebalagola, o teksi rak כשגומר הנשיא ולא קודם, כיוון שרוצה לקיים מצווה ביום תiten schoroi, ואם ישלם לפני הגמר, לא יוכל המצווה יולו. ולא קיים מצווה, על כן דקדק תומד להמתן עד גמר הנשיא הממש, שרק אז חל המצווה ואז שילם לנהג. I totally disagree with this psak. And when something seems so strange to me, if the Chofetz Chaim would write this in Avas Chesed, Bot Ludati, who am I standing across the Chofetz Chaim, Ofer ve'efer anitachas kapes raglav? But it's not in the Avas Chesed. If the Chofetz Chaim would feel this way, it definitely would be in Avas Chesed. He wrote a huge chapter in Avas Chesed on B'yom titen schoroi. The entire Sefer is about honesty, integrity, and compassion in Momenes, in Chesed. No, I don't think so. And sometimes the Nahag is really in a rush. And he says, could you pay me? And we'll say, no. I don't have a mitzvah yet. You're going to arrive at my destination, and then you start checking all your pockets where you have money. What could be wrong in paying a person before he finishes the job? pshitali that you're mekayim b'yom mitzvah tzchoroi. But yom mitzvah tzchoroi is the other side of loisolin pu'ula sochya. Pshitali ke ora shemesh ke beyase bekutcha. If you're also mekayim the mitzvahs you're paying before, kal v'chomer advorim. If I paid him before time, I'm even greater than paying him after he finished his job. I think b'yom mitzvah tzchoroi and loisolin, two sides of the very same coin, pshitali, that you're mekayim the mitzvah. Be a nice guy. What do you need to hold him by his, choke him till he arrives at the destination? Of course, you could pay him before. You could pay him in advance even before you got into the car. And you're mekayim the mitzvah. So, Agon Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein quotes the Rabbi Yoshev. Rabbi Yoshev says, when you take a cab, don't pay him till you arrive. However, based on the Ramban, source number 7, כיוון שהתחילו במלוכן, אז חייב מעכשיו ליתן להם סחורם לשולם, כמו שקיבל עליו, שכשם ששאר הדבורם נקנם בקניין, כסחילס פועלם נקנס, בתחולס המלוכה, והליכס פועלם למלאכתן, יהיה תחולס מלאכתן. So Rabbi Yosef said, the moment you get into the car, and he starts driving, you're already chayiv to pay him. And therefore, if you pay him, you are mekayim the mitzvah b'yom titin secharoi. I disagree with both svaras. To me, milsa de pshit, if you pay him in advance, of course you're mekayim the mitzvah. It's nicer to pay him in advance and wait till he finishes his job. B'yom titin secharoi is just loy sol and pula sochia. And if we would argue that you're not mekayim the mitzvah till he finishes his job, then source number 7 is irrelevant. Source number 7 says, the moment he started working, the transaction is finalized. But you don't need to pay him till he finishes the job. That's a milsa de pshita. If he started the job, you can't retract. You can't say, no, I decided I'm getting out of the car. No. You told me you want to drive to this address. I started working like every poil. Started working, you are obliged to pay him the full price. But when do you need to pay him? Only when he finishes the job. So if we assume that source number 6 is right, source number 7 is wrong. Because all the Ramban means to say is, Atcholas HaMalocha is machayev. But what is it machayev? To pay when he finishes his job. Until he finishes the job, you don't owe him anything. You just can't regret. You can't retract. So, if source number 6 is right, and this shmua in the name of the Chofetz Chaim is correct, that you should never pay a worker until he finishes his job, because you're not mekayim the mitzvah b'yom titin secharoi. And if we accept this argument, it is not only that you're not mekayim the mitzvah, it might be an aveir of bitul mitzvah sasei. It might be a bitul mitzvah sasei. What? Listen, you learned this. I did not right now. I hope that the Chofetz Chaim doesn't write Navas Chesed what is so quoted in his name. If he does, I have a problem. V'hadranabi. I think what he says, in Chilas Erev Sof, there is no chiyuv till he finishes his job. Ki ein schiras mishtalemes Erev Sof. But I don't think the Chofetz Chaim says you're not allowed to pay him before. There is no chiyuv to pay a poyel only when he finishes the job, and that is the halacha of ein schiras mishtalemes Erev Sof. And therefore, until he finishes the job, you have no chiyuv. What I argue is I have no chiyuv, but I'm definitely mekayim the mitzvah. If I'm mekayim the mitzvah when he finishes the job, why wouldn't I have the same mitzvah before he finishes the job? Dina Momenis are all about integrity and decency and compassion. And that's what Dina Momenis are all about. What would be the svara that I should only pay him when he finishes, and if I pay him before, I don't have a mitzvah. To me, neder poshet shalokein. I learned the Avos Chesed more than once, and I don't think it is in Avos Chesed. If it would be, the Moshe Sternbuch probably wouldn't write Chocham Echad Mevi Minhag Chofetz Chaim. He probably would know the Tshuvas Hanogas that it's in Avos Chesed. So, if we say there is no mitzvah to say till he finishes his job, then the fact that hitchel b'malachta is irrelevant. Hitchel b'malachta only means that you cannot back out. The moment he started working, you are obliged to pay him whatever the agreement says you need to pay. And even if you say, go home, I don't need your job, he could go home, but you need to pay him the full account that you agreed upon. But when do you need to pay him? Only when he finishes his job. Bi'alocha. Im yeshlo, source number 8. Ma'at mois. Ubo asochi letvoi abur pilosoi, shegom aloi hayoim, nered tzorach litnem lapoel kedei lakayim, ma shekosa beyoim etin tzorei, v'loi sova lam shemesh. Av shalidei zeh, lo yesheloi b'mela anag HaShabbos, o שיפייסנו, או שיתרצה להמתין עד אחר השבס. חייב תשלים מסוחר בזמנוי, מדיורייסה, וזה רק מדברי קבולה. Only Shabbos is Divrei Kabbalah, and B'yom Yitin Schoroi is a Dioraisa. I think if it wouldn't be the Rabbanan Oinig Shabbos, we still would say a loan comes before a mitzvah. This is not your money. Well, technically it's your money. But if you owe a person money, you cannot withhold that money because I have a mitzvah. If you need to pay a loan and you have the money, but you say, I need to buy a lulav. No. A monetary obligation, it is his privilege to demand his money. And he doesn't need to take into account your mitzvah. So, chiyuv mamoin always comes before your own mitzvahs. And you would need to ask for tzedakah, for Oinig Shabbos, turn to the kupas hashchuna that gives food for people that don't have for Oinig Shabbos. So paying a loan would come before O Shiur Faiseno. Source number 9 is a fascinating din. Ve'inyan schar socher hoyo moiri, and that is the Riyah Kodesh. Nizar ledvar guzma. Reb Chaim Vital says he went to the extreme. V'hoyo misakev lefa'omim mele'espal al mincha ad sheyeshalem. ולפעמים מעכב ומאחר תפילס מנחה עד שקיעס החמו שלא יהיה ביודו מויס מזמונים לפריאס שכר. I think everybody could imagine why he only talks about mincha, not about shachas or marav. Because mincha is the end of the day. V'lo sova yolav hashemesh. If it's shachas, it's already morning, so you have all day. Marav is already night, so it's no difference whether it's Tchilas Halayla or Sof Halayla. But Mincha is the end of the day. So the Riyah Kodesh was misakev, and sometimes he missed the Shkia ad kedei kach. So is B'yoimoi Titin Secharai overrides a chiyuv of Tefillah. That's a far greater chiddush than the previous one about Oinig Shabbos. Because by Oinig Shabbos we're dealing with money. Two mitzvahs which cost money. Paying a socher costs money. Buying food costs money. So this money you cannot use for yourself. It goes for him. But davening is a mitzvah sheben odem l'mokoim. It's not about money. So This is a psak, an amazing psak. You're mevatel mitzvahs tefillah. Well, not entirely mevatel. What does he mean when he says sometimes he waited till after the Shekiyah? Did he daven mincha after the Shekiyah, or he was mevatel mincha? I think he davened after the Shekiyah. Probably the Riyah Kodesh held Shittas Rabbeinu Tam. So what does the Shekiyah mean? Rabbeinu Tam Shekiyah, the first Shekiyah. But even the Mishnah Brura says you could daven mincha sometime after the Shekiyah, not lechatchila. You know, there are 100,000 Eden, primarily in America, that daven every day after the Shekiyah. They once asked the Satmar Chosed, what about the Shekiyah? He says, which Shekiyah? He said, the Shekiyah at the end of the day. He says, the only Shekiyah I know about is in an esrig. Shkiyas, Shkiyin, and Blitas, you know. He never heard about another Shekiyah. He said, do you mean the esrig? So, what does Reb Chaim Vital? Lefa'omim ma'akav v'ma'achar tfilas mincha ad shkiyas achama, but the Loshan is mashma ma'achar tfilas mincha ad shkiyas achama, but he davened mincha. Usually, he was makbid it up before the shkiyah, but if he needed to pay for a poil, hoya ma'akav tfilas mincha ad shkiyas achama, when he didn't have any money. And this is a big chiddush that we find also in the tzavor of the Chayodam. Chayodam writes Musar in the tzavor to his children. That goes beyond Reb Chaim Vital. The Chayodim writes, Mutav shelo tispalel, va'afilu im titzarech levatel tfilas mincha. Where does he take this? That goes beyond Reb Chaim Vital. Reb Chaim Vital said that the Riyah Kodesh didn't have a mincha till he paid. And sometimes he davened mincha after the shkiyah. But the Chayodim says, even if you did be mevatel, tzorach chiyun. Why do I say tzorach chiyun? Where is this? I think I brought it in my sefer. So, Minchas Rosh Hashanah Teshuvas Chelek Gimel Semen Kuf Yutes. There is a big arichas on Beyoyim Titin Schorei. Actually, two different Teshuvas, Kuf Yutes and Kuf Chof. So probably you're back to the Masechta you're learning, and you're over the sugya. But I would recommend, if you did learn this sugya, it's kedai to go through Siman Kuf Yutes and Siman Kuf Chof. In Minchas Osher, some very interesting discussions about B'yoymoi Titen Secharei. Sefer HaChinuch Tov Kuf Peches. Im loy tovoi, oy she'ein loy klum sheyafra lo einoi oiver. Shelo chiyah v'akosav ele b'sheyesh loy bebeisoi, oy sheyochol leporoi. What does it mean, sheyochol leporoi? I think if it's mincha time and a person needs to daven mincha, that is einoi yochel leporoi. Right now, I can't pay. Why can't you pay? Because I'm Jewish and I daven mincha every day, and it's a chiyuv to daven mincha. So the poel will need to wait another 15 minutes till I finish mincha, and then I'm going to pay. Kach hoyo nere la'ani yizdaiti, oisig b'mitzvah potem en ha'mitzvah. Oisig b'mitzvah she'eino iveres, potem oisig b'mitzvah she'eino iveres, so the chavatle b'shul mitzvah veres. But the question is this a mitzvah she'eino veres? L'chayr, it is a mitzvah veres, because if it's going to be after the shkiyah, you are mevatel a mitzvah asay. But I think, lani izdati, that would be b'chlal eino yochel leporoi. And if it's en yochel he's not mevatel the mitzvah. Tzorach iyun. I'm not sure about this. Tzorach iyun, because the Chai Odom goes beyond what Reb Chaim Vital writes. Reb Chaim Vital writes that the Riyah Kodesh davened after the Shkia because he wanted to pay. Menoron, that a person is mevatel tefillah because he needs to pay. Tzorach iyun. Yes, I do see source 50, and on our sheet I did quote the Sefer HaChinuch. So the question, one of the questions is, I don't have any money, but you have metaltalin. You have stuff at home. Ask the poil if you want something else. Maybe he wants your watch, maybe he wants your Mont Blanc pen, or maybe he wants, if you have anything to pay him, you're mechuyev even if you don't have money. And what about if I give him a check? It's in the afternoon, the banks are closed, and I give him a check. Am I mekayim b'yom etin schorei or not? He has nothing to do with this check. How do we define a check? Is a check shvei kesef, and shvei kesef has a din of kesef? Or is a check just shtar choiv? And because the bank is closed, maybe I'm not mekayim the mitzvah. I did not pay on time. You can't pay a worker with shvei kesef. The only din in dina momenis in which shvei kesef einoi kesef is schar poyel. Because if you hire a worker, he expects to get money, and you need to give him money. You can't give him shatel, you can't give him anything else. So in Muncie there lived a gewaldige tzaddik. His name was the Vishnitzer Rebbe, Ramatala. And he really was a gewaldige tzaddik. And he gave a loan to a person. The person didn't pay on time. I don't want to say the person's name, but he's a very well-known person in Muncie. If you hear the story, maybe you could guess who he is. And he wrote a sefer. Nobody really was interested in a sefer. He had a few hundreds for him in his garage. And he told the Rebbe, Shvei kesef ke kesef, I want to pay the loan with my sperm. Well, paying a loan, Shvei kesef ke kesef, and the Rebbe took this for him, and he used to go to bar mitzvahs, and he used to give that Badchen Sefer to the bar mitzvah boys, and everybody wondered. The vision said Rebbe is distributing sperm of one of his neighbors living in Muncie. That's what he got. He got 300 sperm instead of a loan that he gave being paid. What is he going to do with 300 sperm? So he gave for bar mitzvah sperm. That's a funny story, but it's a true story, which is a testament to the tzidkis and the tamimis and the anava of a real tzaddik, zechet tzaddik b'kodesh levrocha. So b'yoyim ha'titin schoroi, fascinating sugis, and I do recommend that you learn min chasos sharas shuvas chayla gimel siman kuf yutes siman kuf chaf. And it is one of the many mitzvahs which reflect mitzvahs HaTorah to be compassionate and not only honest with your monetary dealings. Ad kedei kach, we see in the Poskim, it is more important than Oynik Shabbos and Kavod Shabbos, and maybe even overrides Tefillah, which is Avodah Shebeleiv. It's not that I don't intend to pay. I'll pay later. You can't pay later. You need to be decent, you need to be fair, and you need to be compassionate. Hanochas hayesoid, the fundamental assumption of this mitzvah is, like the Posuk says, ki onihu. Usually the balabayis is more well-to-do than the worker. Most workers in manual labor are not wealthy people. They're not rich people. And therefore, you need to care for him. and not only be honest, but also be compassionate. And that is one of the reasons the Chofetz Chaim wrote the Avos Chesed. Many times I say this, what was unique about the Chofetz Chaim? In every generation there are many Gedolim and many Tzaddikim. What made the Chofetz Chaim stand out amongst all the giants of his time, of his generation? What was unique about the Chofetz Chaim was Kol Kuloi L'Shem Shamayim, and whatever he did in his life, he did because he was convinced that that is Tzorech Hasho, that is a desperate need of Klal Yisrael. And that is why the Chofetz Chaim was one of the greatest Gedolim of his time. We don't have any Sefer Ana Masechta from the Chofetz Chaim, because the Chofetz Chaim thought we have many Sforim in every Masechta, from the Rishonim to the Achronim. Does the world really need Chofetz Chaim, or Masechet Psochim, or Masechet Brochos, or Masechet Bava Kama? The first volume of the Mishnah Berurah to come out was Chelek Gimel Hilchos Shabbos. Came before volume 1 and 2, and the Chofetz Chaim writes, you can't keep Shabbos without knowing Hilchos Shabbos. He wrote the Avos Chesed when he realized that the generation doesn't appreciate enough tzedakah and other mitzvahs, mamoniyos, monetary mitzvahs, ben odam lechaveiroi. One of the amazing sforim of the Chofetz Chaim is Machane Yisrael, which is a sefer that he wrote especially and dedicated to young Jewish boys that were forced into the Russian army. And the Russians had no feeling for Yiddishkeit. They just tried to tear people away from Yiddishkeit. And the Chofetz Chaim wrote an entire sefer, Machane Yisrael, for the young Jewish soldiers in the Russian army, how to try to keep whatever they could keep in Shabbos and in Kashrus with all mine eitzes. And there are many stiras between the Mishnah Berurah and the Machane Yisrael. And some present-day Sforim wonder, but that is the derech of a Gadol, and he saw a need for those young Jewish soldiers to look for every kula possible to b'chol zois enable them in as much as they could to observe Hilchos Shabbos and other halachas. So the Chofetz Chaim wrote a Sefer Avos Chesed because he realized that the generation doesn't really appreciate now the mitzvah of halavah, the mitzvah of tzedakah, and other mitzvahs shebemomoin bein odam lechaveiroi. So it is one of the amazing sforim of the Chofetz Chaim.